Around a year ago, I made Grapple. It's a game where you, well, grapple. Then I said I was going to finish the game, add cool things like VR and multiplayer, and release it on Steam. But then I got bored and ended up making a new game called Godspeed. And then I kind of got bored of that game and, well, basically now I have no game to put on Steam. So, Grapple or Godspeed, which one's it going to be? Okay, I have a coin here. Heads we make Godspeed, and tails we make Grapple. Let's give it a go. Grapple it is then. So Grapple is a speedrunning parkour game. You have a grappling hook, a glider, wall running, and a lunge, and using these 4 movement methods you have to get to the end of the level as quickly as possible. The game even had a core group of speedrunners who still to this day are uploading scores. Alright, so let's get to work. I learned the hard way that you need to back up your project files, so they should be around here somewhere. Oh, I knew I left it in there. So as you can see, we have a pretty decent base to build upon. We've still got the grappling and wall running and all that good stuff. But there's a couple of models that seem to have randomly disappeared, so the first port of call is updating those. So first off, I started with the spear. I drew up some ideas on paper, but ultimately settled on this one, which I traced over in Photoshop. I then pulled my sketch into Blender and started to model it. Then I imported and set up the model into Unity, and it's looking a little static, so I tried to add some slight sway as well as improving the colors a little bit. I then did this exact same process with the glider, and I swear to God, the reason this game took so long is because every single time I make the smallest change, I end up just sitting there and swinging around the level for 20 minutes mindlessly. Alright, so one thing I've always thought Grapple needed was a VR mode. It just seems like the perfect fit. And honestly, who doesn't want to swing around like they're Spider-Man in VR? That sounds fun as f***. The only issue is that I don't have a VR headset, but I do know somebody who does. Hey man, is there any chance I could borrow your VR headset?
Yeah man, no problem. What do you need it for?
Well, you don't really have a choice in the matter. I'm taking it from you regardless.
Yeah, it's fine. I already said you could have it.
Yeah, you just don't really want to see what happens if you don't let me borrow it.
I don't get why you're threatening me. I've said multiple times you can just have it. You can just take it.
Yeah, no, look, man, I don't really care what you're saying. Just once I hang up this call, you've got to go to the post office for me and ship it to me first class for tomorrow. You got it?
I don't really have the time today, but I mean, I can send it tomorrow.
Alright, so now I have a VR headset, we can get to work. I decided to use Steam VR for the game, and the cool thing about that is that it allows you to interface with literally any VR device using one single API. This is great for me because I'm lazy as fuck. Steam VR even spawned rigged versions of my real-life controllers without any prompt, which is just insane. First things first, I want to change up the controllers into hands. I have literally no idea why they're pink. That's much better. Next up, I went through the player controller script and replaced anything keyboard and mouse related with its VR equivalent, and then it was time to test. Oh shit, okay, we're in. So, let's get into a bit where we can stand. Okay. You know what, I'm not doing this anymore. VR development is the absolute worst. You have to keep taking the headset on and off. 90% of the time I was coding like this, and to top it off I almost broke my arm by falling into a wall. Anyway, so now you can move properly, but the hands are super janky. So I dug into the Steam VR source code and ended up commenting out one line which seemed to fix all of this, so great job for that, Valve. Next up, I imported the spear into the game. At the moment, all we can do is walk around, so I got to work on adding jumping, and I do not think that that is right. Next up is grappling. It was relatively easy to add, as all that's really changed from the regular player is the camera. The keen-eyed of you, however, may have noticed that the raycast is still being shot out of the center of the camera. Ideally, we want this to come out the end of the grapple instead. So that's actually a pretty easy fix too, and this was insanely fun. I can't describe with words how fun it is to swing around in VR like this. One thing I wanted to improve from the original game is how the FOV changes with speed, so I coded up a quick solution to that. And next up is the map. This is the one thing that I felt really could be improved over the original. The maps in the original game aren't the nicest looking and mostly just look like they've been hobbled together with no sense of design. So one thing we can do to soften that effect is to use a color palette. I'm going to steal the world themes from the original game, the first of which is the forest. I hopped into Blender and modeled some basic terrain to serve as the foundation. Next, I imported this into Unity and applied a material to it. It seemed a little flat though, so I went online and found some textures, lowered the opacity in Photoshop and applied them in Unity. Next, I made some basic water by just interpolating between two colors depending on how deep the water is. Then I added a ton of trees around the outside of the water and thought it would be a good idea to try and make a wind shader for them, but I instead accidentally made something straight out of an anime boss fight. Eventually, I actually got it to work. I also added the shader to the water so that we can have some waves. waves. I then updated the wind shader to allow blending between two colours to make for a nicer art style on the trees. It's still looking a little barren though, so I modelled a few environment pieces such as logs and this blob that can act as both a rock and a bush. I really can't be bothered to manually scatter these around though, so I decided to write a little script that shoots a ray down from the centre of the rock and will align it with the ground below. This means we can just move the rocks where we want them on the X and Z axis and they'll be placed naturally on the ground. I also did the same thing with some of the bushes. The logs are a little more scarce though, so I opted to just place these manually. As the back of the map doesn't have much going for it, I decided to add fog, which should conceal any empty areas. And to add to that, I also added the same blend script from the trees onto the terrain to make the tops of the mountains a little darker, and altogether this makes the map look far better. In the original game, you could swing from these spiraling hooks, which doesn't really make sense in the context of a forest. So I replaced them with some fallen over trees with chains sticking out the bottom. There were also these mushrooms for bouncing off, which is one of my favourite features, so I decided to bring those back. I modelled and textured said mushroom in Blender and pulled it into Unity. As you can see, the mushrooms work, but they're still a little static, so I created some particles that will emit when you bounce, as well as this jiggly animation. So as for actual gameplay in the forest, there's only one more thing we actually need to do, which is a finish line. I made this goal inspired by the star shines from Mario Sunshine, so now when you finish a level, the leaderboard for that level pops up and shows you the top 5 times in the world as well as where you rank. And that's it for the first level. The second world in the original game was desert themed, so we're going to go for that again. First port of call is to change up the skybox to be more desert-like. Then I went online and found a nice brick texture that we can use for the environment, and I thought it would be cool to add some Egyptian style hieroglyphs onto these bricks. So first up we have the Barji brick, we have the mushy brick, the reef brick, and finally the polymers brick. I filled the whole texture up with these and modelled a wall for it in Blender. Next up is lava. Something I haven't really discussed yet is the design decisions for each world. The first world is supposed to be linear and straightforward. The second world is supposed to be vertical, and the third world is supposed to be intense and cramped. So seeing as we want our desert to be vertical, this lava is going to rise and chase the player to the finish. Next up, I modelled some pyramids and gave them the same brick texture as the walls. The final thing we need to do for the desert levels is a more appropriate version of the mushroom, so I just hue shifted the red texture and called it a day. I then scattered the pyramids and mushrooms around to make the fourth level. The fifth level was basically just more of the same, but you scale around the outside of a huge pyramid. And the sixth level, well, I'll let you explore that one for yourself. Next up is the ice levels, or World 3. First off, I changed up the skybox to more accurately represent ice. Then, if you remember, these stages are supposed to be cramped, so I modelled a tunnel in Blender for the whole level to take place in. Then I made some of these icicle things to make, everything a little less dull. I then made a doorway that we can use to design the interior of the tunnel with. They still look a bit, well, shit to be honest. So I found an ice texture online and overlaid that onto the tunnel. Then to make these levels a little bit more cramped, I added the swinging axe from the first world, but icified, to add some danger. So that's it for the levels. Next I went back to the main menu and improved the options and level select screen a bit, and oh, you can see a spooky missing set of levels. Well my friend, that's the Grapple DLC introducing a whole new world and 3 additional levels for each existing world, which will come out when I hit 100,000 subscribers. We're almost there, so if you'd be so kind to give me a little sub, I'd appreciate that. And while you're down there, you might as well like the video too. The last thing I wanted to add was achievements, so I defined all the achievements I wanted in Steamworks, then spent like an hour creating icons for them all, and as you can see there's 17 total, and a few of them are secrets scattered throughout the levels, so you can go and find them yourself. The final thing left to do was to create a trailer, which I did in a few minutes, and that's it, that's Grapple done. You can play the game right now, link in the description, but before you do, a word from our sponsor. Brilliant is a platform that allows you to learn anything from maths to science to computer science in a visual and interactive way. I recently had a maths exam at college, and Brilliant's course on calculus fundamentals took me through each part of calculus step by step and allowed me to learn at my own pace, and gave me tricky tasks to help solidify the knowledge in my brain. Brilliant also has courses on cutting edge technologies such as AI and machine learning, where you can once again learn these things at your own pace and in a logical way. Or if you're interested in game development like myself, you can learn all about vectors, which I use in every single one of my games. Brilliant is a fun and interactive way to learn traditionally tricky topics. You can sign up to Brilliant for free at the link in the description. However, the first 200 people to sign up will get 20% off a premium annual subscription. So if that intrigues you, you can download Brilliant at the link in the description. It helps me out a lot. Thanks Brilliant for sponsoring this video.